The roar of the primary reheat chamber drowned out the coastal wind battering the corrugated metal roof of the studio. It was a constant, deafening hum that vibrated down through the cracked concrete floor and straight into the rubber soles of my boots. The ambient temperature in my hot shop usually hovered around 110 degrees, but standing 3 feet from the open ceramic doors pushed the local atmosphere closer to 2,000. I stood at the steel marvering table, rolling the heavy stainless steel blowpipe across the yoke. The moment my wrist hesitated, the glowing gather of molten glass sagged just a millimeter. I corrected the roll fast enough to keep the glow centered, exhaling only when the symmetry held perfectly. Sweat stung the corners of my eyes. The muscles in my right shoulder burned from the repetitive strain, a dull ache I had actively ignored since my shift started at noon. I carried the pipe to the wooden bench and sat down, taking a thick pad of water-soaked newspaper in my bare left hand. I cradled the orange mass in the wet paper, letting the steam barrier protect my skin while I shaped the exterior curve. I checked the analog wall clock above my tool rack. It was past midnight. I pulled the pipe away, capped the flared mouthpiece with my thumb to force a trapped pocket of expanding air into the dense mass, and set the pipe securely on the cooling rails. Stripping off my Kevlar sleeves, I tossed them onto a heavy, dust-covered wooden crate in the corner. A massive box of salvaged maritime bank glass I had explicitly refused to throw away for 3 years. I walked to the front of the shop, wiping a streak of fine white silica ash off my jawline, and hit the heavy industrial switch for the exterior floodlight. The harsh halogen beam instantly cut through the thick coastal fog, illuminating the shared gravel parking lot. I walked outside into the freezing night air, grabbed the orange traffic cone I always kept by the sliding door, and dragged it exactly 10 feet to the left. I dropped it precisely in front of the dark blind spot near the adjacent building's rear exit. A heavy rolling steel door rattled upward behind me. Margot Wilson ducked under the metal frame, stepping cautiously into the edge of my shop's light. She wore an oversized cable-knit sweater over her usual tailored bookstore attire, a thick wool scarf wrapped twice around her neck. At 35, she possessed a sharp, grounded competence that usually intimidated the local antique dealers. But right now, standing under the harsh glare, she just looked bone-tired. She looked down at the traffic cone, then up at my face. "Are you working late again, Truitt?" "Just waiting for you," I replied, crossing my arms over my chest to trap the residual heat from the shop. She offered a small, tight smile. "You don't have to keep your secondary furnace running and rearrange the parking lot every Tuesday and Thursday night just so I have a brightly lit path to my car. I carry pepper spray." "Pepper spray doesn't work in a coastal headwind," I pointed out. "The aerosol blows right back in your face. Trust me." Margot let out a quiet breath, the momentary amusement fading instantly. She raised her right hand and rubbed the hairline just above her temple. It was a specific gesture I had cataloged weeks ago. She only ever did it when her stress levels were redlining. "I heard a crack," she said, her voice dropping the neighborly banter entirely. "About 20 minutes ago, from the upper atrium roof inside the bookstore. It sounded like a hunting rifle echoing through the stacks." I didn't ask her if she was sure. I grabbed a tactical flashlight from my tool belt and picked up my digital calipers. "Let's go look at your roof." The Coastal Bookstore was a cavernous historic building constructed in the 1920s. Its defining architectural feature was a massive skylight made of oxidized lead and individual flat panes of textured cathedral glass arranged in a geometric dome. Right now, as we stepped through the rear doors, it was pitch black and freezing cold. We navigated a tight maze of heavy oak tables stacked with rare editions and climbed the creaking stairs to the wraparound mezzanine. The comforting smell of old paper and binding glue hung heavily in the air, but the draft coming from above was sharp. "Right there?" She pointed up toward the center of the dome. I clicked on the flashlight. The high-lumen beam cut a harsh white circle against the dark ceiling. I swept the beam along the iron ribs, counted the lead seams, and felt my throat tighten when I saw the central pane bowing another fraction of an inch inward right before my eyes. A jagged fissure ran entirely across a massive 3 by 4 foot pane of architectural glass. The soft lead came surrounding it had severely buckled, pulling away from the rigid iron frame and exposing crumbling, 90-year-old glazing cement underneath. I reached out, firmly gripping her elbow through the thick wool of her sweater, and pulled her 2 deliberate steps backward, completely out of the direct vertical drop zone. I let go of her arm immediately. The structural integrity of that central pane is gone, I said, keeping my voice low. If that pane drops, the sudden shift in tension takes the surrounding framework with it. The whole section will fall straight down onto the historical fiction tables. Margot exhaled a shaky, uneven breath, stepping back against the wooden railing. Vance has been actively trying to condemn this building for 6 months so his investment firm can bulldoze the lot for luxury condos. He sent an email this afternoon stating he's bringing the chief structural engineer tomorrow morning at 9 for a mandatory envelope inspection. I didn't need the engineer to explain it. The moment she said the word inspection, I pictured the neon orange red tag on the door and the closed sign hanging crooked in the window. I put my entire life savings into acquiring this inventory, she whispered. If they lock those doors tomorrow, my lease is legally dead and I go bankrupt. You need an emergency architectural repair crew right now, I said, sweeping the flashlight beam along the adjacent glass panes. I can't just hire a commercial crew, she replied, raw frustration bleeding into her voice. Emergency stained glass crews won't touch a historic harbor dome without explicit committee permits, and the soonest permit review window is 2 weeks out. Plus, my commercial insurance won't authorize a contractor until the city files an official incident report. Vance is counting on that exact delay. I lowered the flashlight. We need a heavy sheet of half-inch Lexan polycarbonate and a commercial-grade tube of structural silicone. We bridge the broken gap with the plastic, secure it directly to the iron frame, and stabilize the sagging load. It proves absolute mechanical containment to an inspector. Margot looked at me, her expression guarded. I can't afford your hourly commercial rate for emergency overnight restoration, Truitt. If you say no to a trade, I still brace it tonight, I said calmly. You can pay me later, or not at all. I'm not letting that pain fall on anyone. I don't accept charity, she stated firmly, lifting her chin. She wasn't playing a damsel. She was a business owner protecting her agency. I looked down at the chaotic pile of unsorted inventory boxes dominating her front shipping counter. You handle my shipping logistics, I countered, offering a strictly balanced barter. I have 12 highly fragile sculptures that need to be freighted to a Seattle gallery by Friday. I hate administrative paperwork. You take over my freight logistics and invoicing for the month, and we call the overnight labor on this roof perfectly even. She studied my face in the dark, searching for hidden motives. She found none. Deal, she said, her posture straightening. But you have to use my rolling scaffolding. The quiet bookstore instantly transformed into an active construction zone. We locked the yellow steel scaffolding precisely in the center of the main floor. The saw screamed once in my shop, the smell of hot plastic filling the air. By 3 in the morning, the Lexan snapped into place like a clear shield against the dark glass. The sharp bite of the drill echoed loudly in the dome, and the dangerous vibration stopped. I climbed down the scaffolding, my boots hitting the floorboards with a dull thud. Thick steam curled up from the rims, carrying the sharp, comforting scent of bergamot. Earl Grey, she said quietly. Tea is perfectly fine. I took it, letting the deep warmth seep into my cramped fingers. She looked up at the ceiling. The steel clamps and clear plastic were highly visible, but the catastrophic threat was neutralized. Will the structural inspector actually accept a plastic board? I reached into my back pocket and slid a folded, highlighted excerpt from my city permit folder across the wooden counter. The words actively contained by a mechanically secured brace were marked in bright yellow ink. They'll give you a 30-day notice to complete a permanent restoration, I said, tapping the paper. Margot closed her eyes, her tense shoulders dropping a fraction. Thank you, Truitt. At exactly 8:55 a.m., the brass front bell chimed loudly. I sat casually on a stool behind the main counter, reading a trade magazine. My tools were packed away. Vance walked through the door, wearing a sharply tailored navy suit, followed by a weary-looking city structural engineer. Vance walked straight to the center of the store and looked up. His smug, anticipatory smile vanished instantly. What did you install up there? Margot stepped out from the back office wearing a sharp blazer. That is an emergency containment brace, Vance, installed overnight by a licensed contractor. Vance turned aggressively to the engineer. I want this building red-tagged immediately. The engineer zoomed in with his tablet camera. It's a high-impact polycarbonate shield, secured with grade 8 steel screws. It's perfectly code compliant for temporary hazard stabilization. There is no active drop hazard. Vance's jaw visibly tightened. The code requires a permanent, historically accurate restoration within 30 days. Do you have any earthly idea what custom-matched 1920s cathedral glass costs, Miss Wilson? Emergency crews won't touch a permitted historical job for weeks. I'll see you in exactly a month. He marched out, the heavy oak door slamming behind him. The engineer signed a quick form, handed Margot the copy, and followed Vance. Margot walked slowly over to the nearest display table and began stacking 3 hardback books, aligning their spines with rigid precision. He's absolutely right. The cost of a master glass replacement is thousands of dollars in labor alone. I bought myself a 30-day window, but I didn't actually win. I stood up from the stool, walking over. I placed my hand flat on the top cover of the book she was adjusting, physically stopping her repetitive movement. I have a heavy wooden crate of salvaged 1920s cathedral glass from the old maritime bank demolition sitting in my shop, I stated. I bought the entire lot at a bankruptcy auction 3 years ago. The exact tint and rolled texture are a perfect match for your dome. It just requires precise cutting and re-leading. She looked down at my hand, then slowly up at my face. I can't ask you to do that kind of labor. I want immediate access to the archival blueprints in your basement. I pulled a small leather notebook from my pocket and dropped it onto the table. To perfectly replicate the facet dimensions, I need to verify the original math. Vance thinks he has you trapped in a financial corner. He doesn't realize he challenged a fabricator who hoards historical supplies. Instead of staying isolated in my hot shop, I moved a drafting table into the back corner of Margot's bookstore. I spent my mornings running my commercial business, but from 4 in the afternoon until midnight, I mapped out the complex lead-came matrix on graphing paper. The friction between our 2 working styles started on a Thursday evening. I was sitting at the drafting table, surrounded by sharp glass offcuts. I hadn't eaten since dawn. My cell phone buzzed continuously with missed calls from Elias, my primary raw materials supplier. I ignored it, aggressively running a scoring wheel over a piece of antique salvage glass. Margot walked over, carrying a clipboard and a foil-wrapped turkey sandwich. She placed the sandwich near my elbow, then calmly placed a color-coded spreadsheet directly over my cutting mat, physically blocking the path of my tool. "Look at the paper, Truitt," she commanded, adopting the strict authority of a project manager. She had mapped out my entire outbound freight schedule and organized tracking numbers for the Seattle shipment. "Your high-priority gallery shipment went out today. Packed safely and insured," she said, tapping a line on the paper. "But I also noticed you completely missed 2 major invoices from your silica supplier. You haven't paid them because you've been sitting in my store scoring glass for 3 days straight." My grip tightened fiercely on the heavy glass cutter until the knurling bit into my palm. I had to consciously force myself to set the tool down before I accidentally scored the antique glass crooked. I wanted to fiercely defend my tunnel vision, but I looked up and saw the dark circles under her own eyes. She wasn't attacking my competence. She was proactively managing chaos. "I missed the invoices," I admitted, my voice tight. I dropped the ball. Her defensive posture softened. "I already called Elias. I authorized a direct wire transfer from your commercial account using the old routing numbers. The invoices are paid. Your delivery won't be delayed." A short, genuine laugh escaped me despite the exhaustion. "You paid Elias? He usually complains about his gout for 20 straight minutes before taking a credit card number." "I listened to his gout," she said deadpan. "It sounds incredibly painful." "Thank you," I said quietly, profound relief washing over me. "I am setting a hard boundary, Truitt." She picked up the spreadsheet. "You do not work on my glass project past 9 p.m. anymore? You need to eat, and you need to sleep. If you burn out, you can't help me." 9 p.m., I agreed, unwrapping the sandwich. The following Tuesday, a coastal rainstorm lashed against the tall windows. It was 8:30 p.m. True to our schedule, I was quietly packing my cutting tools. Margot was at the front counter, logging inventory. I walked toward the break room to wash the toxic lead residue off my hands. As I passed the counter, I noticed she was typing rapidly with one hand, her other hand wrapped tightly around an empty ceramic mug, trying to draw non-existent warmth from the cold porcelain. I walked into the break room and scanned her tea selection. The cardboard box of peppermint tea on the top tier had the corner completely torn off. I steeped a fresh mug, measuring exactly 3 minutes on my watch. I set the steaming mug quietly on the counter next to her keyboard. I didn't wait around for a thank you. I just turned my back and started walking toward the door. "Truett," she called out softly. I stopped and looked back. She was holding the warm mug with both hands, the steam rising around her face. "You noticed," she said, genuine surprise in her voice. "Peppermint," I confirmed. "You only drink the Earl Grey when you're out of options." She smiled a beautifully unguarded expression that completely transformed her exhausted face. "Good night, Truett." The very next morning, the fog hadn't lifted. I was sorting through lead-came strips on my bench when my shop's rolling door rattled upward with a harsh screech. Margot ducked inside. Her posture was completely rigid. She walked straight past the safety line, holding a thick sheet of legal paper. Her knuckles were entirely white. "Vance found a zoning loophole," Margot said, her voice hollowed out by sudden panic. "Because my building is inside the historic harbor district, standard safety patches require an immediate, secondary review by the Historical Overlay Committee." I scanned the dense print. They moved the inspection to tomorrow, 8 a.m. If the permanent glass is not fully installed and passing a visual inspection by the time the committee arrives, they will red tag the building immediately. She wrapped her arms tightly around her torso. "The temporary stay is completely revoked." The time frame was brutal. Cutting a faceted architectural panel and soldering the perimeter took 3 full days. Vance was deliberately using the clock as a weapon to bypass the 30-day window. "I can't do it, Truett," Margot whispered. A slight tremor shook her hands. "I have fought for this store every single day for 3 brutal years. I don't have any fight left." I dropped the notice onto the workbench. I stepped closer, deliberately stopping short of her personal space. I opened my arms and waited. She looked at me, the tremor still visible in her hands, and then she stepped forward into my space first. Only then did I hold her steady, not tight. It was a purely protective hold, an anchor against the panic. She pulled back slowly after a minute. Her professional armor slid back into place. "The cementing process takes days to set. I need to know exactly what we are doing tonight." I slid my printed permit folder onto the metal bench, tapping a highlighted section. "The engineer clears hazards under the stabilized pending cure rule. We just need mechanical retention and a fully sealed perimeter. The architectural epoxy can finish its chemical cure tomorrow while you keep the store closed." The tremor in her hands stopped entirely. She nodded once. "Tell me exactly what to do." By 2 in the afternoon, we were deep in the grueling process. Margot stood across the heavy work table, wearing thick leather gloves, operating the industrial heat gun, while I managed the soldering iron. I dragged the hot iron across the seam, fusing the metals with a hiss of pine rosin. She kept the high-temperature air moving precisely, pre-warming the metal so the seal held. We worked relentlessly. By 3 a.m., the entire panel was leaded and soldered. Next came pushing dark epoxy putty under the lead flanges to permanently waterproof the glass. At 4 a.m., I was pressing the thick putty in with a wooden fid when the tool slipped from my sweaty grip. The hard edge slammed directly into the glass surface. Crack. I grabbed my flashlight and shined the beam directly on the surface. A 2-inch stress fracture had appeared in the bottom corner of the central pane. It completely compromised the weather seal. I stepped back, dropping the tool onto the bench. It clattered loudly. It fractured. The corner seal is compromised. The clock ran out. I expected her to finally break under the stress. Instead, I heard a steel drawer sliding open. Margot was methodically digging through my secondary tool chest. "Where's the copper foil tape?" she asked calmly. "Margot, we don't have the time to recut and re-lead that entire section," I argued, scrubbing a hand over my tired face. "We have exactly 3 hours," she corrected, her voice carrying an absolute authority. "You told me copper foil overlay is an acceptable cosmetic lead line repair pending a full replacement. You wrap the crack tightly and solder completely over it to create a false lead line." My hesitation evaporated entirely, burned away by her unshakable resilience. I grabbed the soldering iron, hold the glass perfectly steady. The repair required absolute thermal control. We burnished the thin copper tape flat over the crack, and I ran the hot iron over it with extreme care, creating a false silver line. The antique glass held. By 7:30 a.m., the sun cast a cold, gray light through the shop windows. The panel was finished, the epoxy setting rapidly. We hauled the 80-pound glass panel up the bookstore stairs, our boots echoing loudly. I quickly climbed the scaffolding. Margot handed up the heavy panel using the suction grips. It slotted into the old iron framework with a heavy, satisfying thud. I worked furiously, driving the heavy steel retention clips directly into the iron frame to lock the glass securely in place. I wiped the final putty residue away just as the front door chimed loudly below. Vance stood in the entryway, looking aggressively punctual. Behind him stood Mrs. Hanley, the stern-faced head of the Historical Overlay Committee, along with the city's structural engineer. "Miss Wilson," Vance called out, his voice echoing in the large room. "It's 8 o'clock. I assume you are fully prepared to vacate." Margot walked slowly out from the back office, completely composed and wearing her sharp blazer. "There is no hazard, Vance. The historic restoration is complete." Vance scoffed loudly and looked up at the ceiling. The entire room went dead quiet. A brilliant shaft of golden morning light poured through the newly installed panel, refracting perfectly through the textured 1920s silica. "Mrs. Hanley?" Margot said clearly, gesturing up to the scaffolding where I was standing. "This is Truett Evans, my restoration contractor. He's officially on retainer for the dome." Mrs. Hanley walked forward, adjusting her thick glasses, and looked up. My word. The era matching is exact. The facet alignment is practically perfect. I climbed slowly down the scaffolding, my heavy boots hitting the floor. "The mechanical load is completely secured," I addressed the engineer, "pending the full chemical cure time while the store remains closed today." The city engineer stepped forward, zooming his tablet camera in, and tapped the steel retention clips with a red laser pointer. He moved the beam to the soldered corner. He tested the panel, watching the reading hold on his gauge, then nodded. "Copper foil overlay noted on the corner seam monitoring required," he said, writing on his clipboard. "But mechanical retention is verified and the perimeter is sealed. It meets the stabilized pending cure allowance for now." He turned to Mrs. Hanley. "Clear the immediate violation, but I'll schedule a mandatory follow-up visual next week." Violation cleared, Mrs. Hanley agreed firmly, signing a formal document before turning her sharp gaze on Vance. "And Mr. Vance, I suggest you stop wasting this committee's time with frivolous demolition attempts." Vance's face turned mottled red. He turned sharply on his heel and marched out, the heavy door slamming behind him. Mrs. Hanley gave Margot a warm nod of approval before leading the committee out. By 9 o'clock, the store was completely empty again. The intense adrenaline finally bled out of my system, leaving a hollow exhaustion. Margot walked over quietly, handing me a cold bottle of water. I drank half of it in one pull. "I'll come back and break down the scaffolding tomorrow," I said, zipping the heavy bag shut. "You risked your own valuable inventory and your health to do this overnight," she said, stopping my hand as I reached for my jacket. "Why?" I looked at her standing beautifully in the refracted amber light. "I left the spare key to my shop on your counter yesterday, so you can grab tools or lock up if I'm out on a delivery run. Nothing personal, nothing owed. Your store comes first. You get to set every boundary." She exhaled a soft breath. She pulled a clean rag from her pocket and gently wiped a streak of dark soot from my jawline, stepping back and evaluating my face like she was checking a successful repair. "You need to go to sleep, Truett," she said gently. "I'll see you tomorrow." 2 days later, the coastal weather cleared into a bright afternoon. I walked through the bookstore's front door at noon, wearing a clean Henley shirt, carrying a flat cardboard box. As I walked up the driveway, I noticed the heavy orange traffic cone was already sitting perfectly in the blind spot, moved there by her before I even opened my shop. Margot was standing at the main register. Her entire face lit up when the bell chimed. She walked quickly around the counter to meet me. "Slept 12 straight hours," I admitted, setting the box down. I opened it, revealing a piece of custom-cut, frosted privacy glass to fix the freezing draft in your back office door. "That's funny. I have a practical upgrade for you, too," She handed me a heavy, leather-bound ledger. Inside, my chaotic commercial accounts and complex shipping schedules were fully updated. Taped securely to the inside cover was a formal, printed retainer contract with my name at the top. I signed a contract with a new automated logistics software this morning, she explained, her eyes perfectly steady. I officially took over your administrative system. Oh, and the Seattle gallery called an hour ago. The shipment arrived perfectly. She taped a simple, handwritten sign to the brass register. Restoration week closed at 9 p.m. Then she handed me a spare brass key with the date written on a small yellow sticky note. Tuesday. Thursday. I stepped forward, closing the final distance between us. She reached out, her fingers lacing quietly through mine. I rested my forehead against hers for a second, feeling the steady, calm rhythm of her breathing, then stepped back, letting the quiet moment stay exactly what it was. A promise. I'll go get the silicone from the truck, I said softly. Take your time, she replied, looking around her bright, secure sanctuary. I'm not going anywhere. That week taught me what lasts. Steady hands, clear boundaries, and a partner who shows up when the storm hits. Please like and subscribe so we can share more stories like this.